Good day and welcome to the 10th anniversary episode of CDI Talks. My name is Anton Shekhovtsov and I chair the Center for Democratic Integrity, an Austria-based organization monitoring authoritarian influences in Europe. Today I'm talking to Marie Mendras, a French political scientist specializing in Russian studies and international relations. Dr. Mendras is a professor at the Paris School of International Affairs of Sciences Po, a research fellow at the National Center for Scientific Research, and a member of the editorial board of the French humanities journal Esprit. She has published extensively, both in English and in Russian, on Russia-West relations, as well as on the Russian political system, elite behavior, elections and society. Marie also provides expertise to the European institutions and think tanks, and has served as a consultant for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Defense. I hope you will enjoy our conversation with Marie. Do like this video and subscribe to our channel not to miss future editions of CDI Talks. Marie, thank you so much for this conversation. My first question would be about the sanctions. You know, it's the 7th year now after the annexation of Crimea, after the conflict in eastern Ukraine with participation of Russia. The EU sanctions imposed on Russia because of its behavior in Ukraine for 7 years are there. Nobody is going to lift them anytime soon. I think that not only Putin's regime, but also some officials in EU member states thought that the sanctions would fall at some point. But this is not happening. Was it a mistake on the part of Putin's Russia to think that the EU is so weak and it would lift the sanctions and everything would go back to normal?
Sanctions against the Russian ruling elites are not only coming from the EU. What was extraordinary about the spring and summer of 2014 was that all democratic countries voted sanctions. The United States, Canada, Australia, Japan, you name it. And of course, the European Union, at the time 28 countries with Great Britain. So there is nothing specific to the EU. Your question about Putin's surprise, yes, Vladimir Vladimirovich did not anticipate any of this, which shows that there was no big plan about Ukraine. I think the Russian rulers have been waiting for next day's event to make a decision about what to do to exfiltrate Yanukovych or to fight to keep him in power in Kiev. Then, they had the Crimea plan that was certainly in one of the drawers for many years, but then they decided to go, as you remember, during the Olympics in Sochi. I mean, that was something completely sensational. And then they went further, but I don't think it was anticipated by the military even, which was the intervention in eastern Donbass.
But at the same time, I think that there was this misunderstanding on the part of Putin's regime about the structures, about the institutions of the EU. Because probably you would agree that in Russia itself, all state institutions, they are sort of fake. They are not real institutions. While at the same time in the EU, it may be very, very slow, but it has a working institution. So there was no such anticipation. What do you think about this, confusion on the part of Putin's regime about the EU's institutions, and why do you think it's actually quite strong in contrast to what the Kremlin thinks of the EU?
Yeah. I don't think Putin and his men compare their own country to the EU institution and the EU space and community. I would say that in Putin's Russia, institutions are not fake, but they are hollowed out by the regime, and they are more than decorative in the sense that they make it possible for them to hide the real ruling mechanisms, which all happen outside the government, outside parliament, outside trade unions, etc. So this is a big subject in itself, is how this complete destruction of public space, public institutions, and recent, in inverted commas, elections in September have demonstrated, that even universal suffrage now and representation of citizens is dead. So the question about the EU is very interesting. If the EU didn't exist, and each European government in 2014 had to engage a discussion in Parliament and a vote and go for targeted sanctions, it would have taken ages. And in probably a good half of the countries, no sanction would have been agreed by Parliament. And it's very difficult in a country like France or Germany to go for what you'd call in America executive orders, where the executive can go for that kind of decision. Now, you have the 28 heads of government and heads of state meeting in this beautiful room and having to decide, what do we do about Putin invading parts of Ukraine and then giving the so-called separatists direct military help and a Buk missile, and they probably make a mistake and down a civilian plane, the Malaysian airline, mid-July 2014. And can you imagine one of the 28 saying, I am against sanctioning the Russian state and Putin's regime for that? And it's very comfortable for the 28 governments, because when they go home, they do not have to bear the full responsibility for the decision to go for targeted sanctions against the Russian rulers.
I cannot agree more here. I would only add that probably it's also simpler or easier for the EU to impose sanctions in contrast to individual countries, is because the EU or capitals or officials who gather to discuss these questions, they can also make a reference to European values enshrined in the official documents of the EU. They can say, we are defending European values, because nobody can say that we are defending Hungarian values by sanctioning Russia, or we are defending French values, because then it would be very, very strange. It would sound very strange. But this reference to the European values is something very different.
I think more importantly, it is the question of principles and law. The concept of values has been so used and overused and misused by the non-democrats, and especially in Russia or Belarus, that I prefer the use of the terms of principles, fundamental rights, and rule of law. Because, as you well know, every autocrat loves to talk about democracy, even the Chinese leader. So values could be in the way of a true and transparent debate, especially with our societies in Europe, when precisely the term democracy is being questioned because there's no definition. Each one of us has his own personal definition of democracy, whereas if you take France, now entering a period of presidential campaign, nobody is going to question the rule of law. Nobody is going to question the independence of judges in France. Nobody is going to ask for dramatic change in French security policies, etc.
But I think also with the EU, in addition to these rule of law and international norms and law as such, there is also like non-material aspects about the sanctions, about being together. It's solidarity.
Sure.
Because I think it's probably solidarity is not enshrined in any law, but still every member state, I think, even if they are governed by people who are more or less friendly towards Putin's Russia, it's still very, very difficult for them to go against this solidarity.
Absolutely. But it's not only solidarity, because you do have at times solidarity between democracies. For example, in 2014, all democracies were together criticizing Putin's decision, but also Putin came aside. And remember, he had to quit the G8 immediately and a number of other institutions. He was not invited to any bilateral meeting or EU meeting during at least 2 or 3 years. So yes, there was a very strong political solidarity amongst all democracies that the man had become a threat to European security and to just the general functioning of world relations, and also the respect for sovereign state, the respect for the UN Charter, etc., etc.
There are fears in some European capitals that cutting down on communication with Russia would lead to Russia becoming more, probably even aggressive, bolder, to be more isolated, and because of this, may pose even a bigger threat to its neighbors and also to probably even EU countries. At the same time, the most recent report of the European Parliament on strategic relations with Russia, for example, said that the EU should be ready not to recognize the so-called elections in Russia, parliamentary elections, if they are not fair, if they are not democratic, if they violate the international norms. In one of your most recent articles, you gave plenty of evidence that actually it was the case that Russian elections were not democratic. They did not. They violated.
They were not elections.
They were not elections from the very start. So imagine the EU does not recognize these elections as fair. So that would be cutting down on communication with Russia. Can there be a balance? Because some would believe we still need to talk to Russia, for it not become so isolated. Where's the balance here? Can actually there be a balance in these, ever-changing situation?
Well, my response is very simple. Russia is not Vladimir Putin and the groups around him. So we have to stop saying Russia. The Russians have absolutely no possibility, no capacity to tell their deputies or their executive powers, administrations, what they would like and what they don't like in what they do. They feel misgoverned. In the great majority of them, there is absolutely no doubt about them. In the non-elections of September, all the good independent experts and observers came to the conclusion that at the most of the 109 million voters in the Russian Federation, at the most, 15 million of them voted freely or under pressure for Putin's governing party, United Russia, because also, turnout was low, and all the numbers that we got from the Electoral Commission, from the government, were manipulated results. The problem is exactly what you mentioned. That is, how do we reach another stage in our relationship with the Kremlin, not with the Russians. We have no problem with the Russians, I don't think. As you know, the big events of 89, 1991 showed. You know, I don't think the average Russian, when he's freed of the Putin grip and the Putin propaganda on television and everywhere, the average Russian will very soon forget about Putin and his very special brand of hysteric nationalism, which is really just a mode of survival to stay in power indefinitely. So our relationship is focused on the relationship with the one and only, who can talk to us and make decisions, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
And of course, in recent months, even we see that many organizations, Western organizations, are now considered to be undesirable organizations in Russia.
Yes.
So this dialogue between Western NGOs and Russian NGOs, it's shrinking every month.
You can even be an undesirable if you're abroad.
Oh, exactly.
It's fantastic. You can be an undesirable organization, or you can be an undesirable person. You can be
a foreign agent.
For a foreign agent, you can be even a person can be a foreign agent.
Exactly.
Or an organization. So we now it's everything is surrealistic in Russia, but dangerous, of course. It's not a film, and this is what we have to fight against, and we have the right to do so. And those who pretend in our countries that it is non-respect of the sovereignty of domestic affairs in Russia, and this is totally ridiculous.
Marie, my last question would be about the expertise. You're a scholar, you're an academic. Some would say that during the Cold War, politicians had more expertise about the Soviet Russia. Now, people would say that we are lacking this expertise, and probably what's more important, in the Cold War there was a coherent relationship between the academic expertise, scholarly expertise, research expertise about Soviet Russia in comparison to what we have now about Putin's Russia. Do you think that there's this lack of expertise?
Well, I think from a European point of view, this is not quite the way the Cold War functioned. I think what you described is more the American paradigm, clearly. And I was a grad student in the US during the Cold War, and I remember you had a much closer relationship and politically correct position among academics, especially in Washington, D.C., and who were very closely linked to think tanks and to the administration. And the United States is very far away from Moscow. The Cold War, the division of Europe in two, was lived very differently by the Europeans on each side, on both sides of the wall. So there were very different positions. If we take France, very different positions among the political class, and among scholars, among journalists, and in public opinion about Soviet the Soviet life, about the Soviet regime, about this is very different, in the still in the 1950s, early 60s, we had a strong communist party very close to Moscow. Italy was even worse probably, and so no, during those years, first it was very difficult to get good, relevant, honest expertise. If there was a consensus, it was in the US, because there was virtually not much space for criticism of the executive policy or votes in Congress. I think where Vladimir Putin is helping us now is that he's going so far in this repression of everything. It's not only repression of free voices, it is repression of economic actors, repression of free business, repression of information. A man who bans information in the society and in the administration inevitably becomes a disinformed leader. And that's what we're dealing with. So it is good news in the sense that the Kremlin will be making more and more mistakes and will become more and more disliked inside and outside Russia. But it is bad news because declining leaderships that go for a besieged fortress mentality and propaganda, they can act erratically. And this is where we are, I think, in Europe. We are seeing those two trends in a way, and we are walking, a very tight line.
Thank you for this conversation, Marie.
Thank you, Anton.